Ethan Cole had spent most of his years riding across empty land where the wind moved like a quiet river and the sky felt large enough to swallow every thought a man carried. He was a simple cowboy with simple habits, a man who spoke only when needed and listened more than most. On that warm afternoon, he traveled with a small wagon filled with supplies he wanted to trade at the next settlement. The sun was steady above him, the road was empty, and nothing gave him any sign that this day would become different from any other he had lived. He just guided his horse along the dusty trail, thinking about the fence he needed to fix back at his small ranch and the rainwater barrel that needed repairing. He stepped down from the wagon for a moment to tighten one of the ropes on the back. His boot slid a little on the dry soil. And when he looked down, he suddenly froze, not because he felt fear, but because he noticed something most people never wished to see so close. A rattlesnake lay stretched out right under his foot, its body still, its tail silent, its eyes open but calm. Ethan did not jump. He did not shout. He simply stayed still, breathing slowly and looking at the creature with quiet respect. The snake did not rise, did not coil, and did not rattle. It was strange, almost like it trusted him to remain peaceful. A soft breeze passed, lifting dust around his boot, yet the snake remained calm. Ethan had seen many rattlesnakes in his life, enough to know that their behavior changed depending on the energy of the person near them. He believed that animals sensed feelings more clearly than people, so he kept his thoughts steady, kept his breathing soft, and waited. He talked to the creature in a low tone, telling it he meant no harm. His voice sounded like the wind passing through old grass, slow and gentle. Then something surprising happened, something that shook the stillness of that quiet scene. A loud, powerful voice echoed from above the ridge beside the road. It wasn't a normal shout, but a voice so strong that the ground almost seemed to listen. "Cowboy, why is the rattlesnake under you so calm?" the voice roared. "Do I not frighten you?" Ethan didn't move his foot yet, but he lifted his head, trying to see who had spoken. On the high ridge, outlined by sunlight, stood a woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. She was tall, far taller than most frontier folks. Her shoulders were broad, her stance firm, and her thick braid swung behind her like a rope. She held a long wooden staff in one hand, and her clothes were rough frontier wear, patched in places but strong. Her size alone made her look like someone carved out of the land itself, someone who belonged to the wild more than to towns or houses. Ethan did not feel frightened of her. Instead, he felt more surprised by her sudden appearance than anything else. She watched him closely, her expression somewhere between confusion and curiosity. It was clear she had expected him to panic because of the snake, or at least react strongly to her booming voice. But Ethan stayed calm, keeping his hands low and gentle. "I don't think the snake wants trouble," he said quietly, still not shaking the creature. "And trouble is something I'm not here to bring." The tall woman blinked a few times, as if not used to hearing such steady words during such a strange moment. She climbed down the ridge with long strides, each step sending a small cloud of dust into the air. When she reached the road, Ethan could see her clearly. Her height was indeed unusual, and her strength showed in the way she carried herself, but her eyes were kind, almost soft, as if she was more used to helping the world than hurting it. She stopped before him, studying both the cowboy and the snake. "Most men would have jumped back," she said, her voice calmer now, though still loud enough to shake the dry leaves nearby. "Jumping would scare the snake," Ethan replied. "No need for that." The woman knelt down slowly, showing surprising gentleness for someone her size. She tapped her long staff lightly on the ground beside the snake. The creature lifted its head slightly, then began to move away from Ethan's boot. It slid across the dirt, disappearing into a patch of grass without making a single sound. The tall woman stood up again with a small smile. "You stay calmer than most I've met." Ethan brushed dust from his pant leg and nodded politely. "And you're not like most people I've met either." She gave a short laugh, deep and warm. "My name's Mara," she said, placing the end of her staff on the ground. "People around here know me by that name. Some call me other things." She avoided saying those other names, and Ethan understood the unspoken meaning. People sometimes had trouble accepting those who looked different. "I'm Ethan Cole," he said. Mara nodded once, her eyes wandering briefly over his horse and wagon. "You're heading to the trading post, aren't you?" "That's the plan," Ethan said, "at least until the sun goes down." Mara looked back toward the ridge, as if thinking of something. "Be careful on the road," she said. "The storms come fast this week, and not just storms, sometimes strangers too." She paused, then added in a softer tone, "I didn't mean to startle you earlier." "You didn't," Ethan said honestly. Her eyebrows raised a little, almost as if she didn't believe it. She studied his face for a moment, as though trying to understand how a man could be so steady in front of both a rattlesnake and a giant frontier woman. Ethan didn't look away. He didn't frown or seem uneasy. His calmness wasn't forced. It was simply part of who he was. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, Mara's presence did not unsettle him. Instead, he felt curiosity rising inside him. A quiet interest that he tried to ignore. Mara tapped her staff twice against the ground, a gesture that looked like habit more than anything. "Well," she said with a breath, "I'll let you be on your way. You handle yourself well, Ethan Cole." He tipped his hat gently. "Thank you, Mara." She turned and began to walk back toward the ridge. Her steps were slow and heavy, but also graceful in their own way. Ethan watched her climb, noticing how the sunlight caught her braid, giving it a warm color. She paused at the top and looked back down at him. Something unspoken passed in that glance, something both of them felt, but neither understood. Then she walked away and disappeared behind the rocks. Ethan stood still for a long moment, wondering why the scene felt like the first page of a story he had not expected to live. He looked at the spot where the rattlesnake had been resting earlier. The ground was undisturbed now, but the memory of its calm stillness stayed with him. The snake had not feared him. Mara had not frightened him, and he could not explain why all of this felt important. He mounted his wagon and continued down the road, but his thoughts were no longer on fencing or rain barrels. Instead, he kept seeing the tall woman on the ridge, the strength in her posture, the surprise in her eyes when he did not react the way she expected, and the calm she had unknowingly brought him. He had met many people in his life, but none like Mara, and deep inside, a quiet feeling told him this would not be the last time their paths crossed. The land stretched wide before him, open and silent, but the day no longer felt ordinary. Something had shifted in the air, something he could not see but could feel like the slow beat of distant thunder. He kept riding, unaware that this simple meeting would lead to a story much bigger than either of them yet understood. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in many years, Ethan didn't mind the distance. Something waited on that path, something he would soon discover. Ethan reached the trading post just before sunset, but his mind was far from the small wooden buildings and the smell of grain and leather that usually welcomed him. His thoughts kept drifting back to the tall woman on the ridge, the way she spoke, the way she moved, and the strange calmness of that moment with the rattlesnake. He tried to brush the thoughts away, focusing instead on unloading his supplies, greeting the shopkeeper, and checking prices. But every time he looked toward the horizon, he half expected to see her walking between the hills again. People at the trading post were talkative as usual, swapping news, asking favors, and sharing worries about the coming storm. Ethan nodded politely, answering what he needed to, but he stayed quiet most of the time. His nature had always been that way, steady and silent. But that evening, his silence felt heavier, filled with thoughts he could not explain. While tying his horse outside the general store, Ethan overheard two men speaking nearby. They sat on a wooden bench, sipping tin cups of warm coffee. "You hear about the frontier bride?" one man asked. Ethan didn't mean to listen, but the name caught his attention instantly. "Who now?" the other man replied. "That tall girl who lives out by the high ridges. Folks say her family's arranging her marriage with a rancher from up north." Ethan leaned slightly closer without making it obvious. His heart picked up an unexpected beat. The first man continued. "They say she's strong as an oak and taller than any man around. Lives half wild like the land raised her. She's supposed to leave her family soon." The other man laughed. "I've heard stories about her. They say she scares half the settlers." "That's the one. Mara." Ethan's hands paused on the horse's reins. There was something uncomfortable in the way the men spoke, as if they only saw her size and not the softness he had seen in her eyes. He didn't step into their conversation. That wasn't his way. He simply walked toward the store, but his thoughts had already begun circling like a windstorm inside him. He spent the next hour trading goods, buying what he needed, and helping a couple of travelers fix a broken wagon wheel. But the talk about Mara lingered in his mind. The idea of an arranged marriage didn't sit right with him, not because he had any claim to her, but because she had seemed like someone who should choose her own path. The way she walked, the way she spoke, the way she looked at the world, none of it matched someone being handed over like a duty. When he left the trading post and headed toward his ranch, the sky had already turned deep blue. The first stars appeared over the hills, shining like quiet markers across the land. Ethan rode slowly, letting the horse take its time. The air was cool, the road empty, and the sound of crickets filled the night. Halfway home, he saw something unusual. A lantern flickered ahead, near an old broken fence. As he rode closer, he realized it wasn't a stranger or a traveler. It was Mara. She stood alone in the dim light, her long braid hanging over her shoulder, her tall frame visible even in the dark. She was trying to lift part of the fallen fence, struggling with a crooked post stuck deep in the ground. Ethan slowed his horse. "You're working late," he said gently. Mara looked up, surprised but not frightened. "Fence blew down in the wind," she answered. "Needs to be fixed before the livestock wander off." Ethan dismounted and walked closer. "You want help?" She hesitated only a second before nodding. "If you don't mind." Ethan rolled up his sleeves, and together they worked in the quiet of the night. Mara held the long board steady while Ethan adjusted the post. She lifted the heavier parts with ease, but he guided them carefully, making sure nothing cracked. They moved like a team, without having to speak much, each understanding what the other needed to do next. After a while, Mara stepped back to stretch her arms. "You work smoother than most men," she said, wiping dust from her hands. "And you work stronger than most," Ethan replied honestly. She smiled, a warm but shy expression, nothing like the loud voice she had used earlier that day. "I grew up doing all kinds of work," she said. "People think I'm too different, too strong, too tall." Ethan leaned against the fence rail. "Different doesn't mean wrong." Mara looked at him, eyes soft and thoughtful. "Many don't see it that way." He didn't know what to say at first, but the silence didn't feel strained. It felt like a quiet space where unspoken truths could breathe. After a moment, she picked up the lantern and walked a few steps toward a narrow trail. "Would you walk with me for a bit? My family's place isn't far." Ethan nodded and took his horse's reins, following her down the dusty path. The trail led to a small homestead tucked between two hills. The house was modest but clean, built with thick logs and surrounded by a rough wooden fence. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney. Mara's mother stepped outside when she heard footsteps. She was shorter but had the same strong eyes. When she saw Ethan, she smiled kindly. You must be the cowboy my daughter mentioned. Ethan was surprised. Mara glanced away, almost embarrassed. I only said he handled a rattlesnake calmly, she muttered. Her mother laughed warmly. Come inside. We don't get many visitors this late. Ethan tried to decline politely, not wanting to impose, but Mara's mother insisted. Inside the house, the warmth soothed him. The smell of bread and herbs lingered in the air, and lantern light made the room feel peaceful. Mara sat near the fireplace, her hands folded, her expression a mix of pride and quiet uncertainty. Ethan noticed she didn't seem used to having visitors either. Her mother handed Ethan a warm drink and asked about his journey. They talked about ranch work, storms, and nearby settlers. Mara listened quietly, though sometimes Ethan caught her watching him as if studying something she couldn't explain. After a while, her mother said, It's good for Mara to meet someone like you. She spends too much time alone. Mara frowned lightly, but didn't argue. Ethan could feel she wasn't offended. She simply didn't know how to respond. Her mother added, People talk, but they don't know her heart. Mara's eyes lowered, a flicker of sadness crossing them. Ethan understood then that beneath her strength was a girl who had grown used to being judged, misunderstood, and sometimes feared. He set his cup down gently. I think people who judge her don't know her at all, he said quietly. Mara's mother smiled with relief, almost as if someone had finally spoken the words she wished others would say. Mara looked up at Ethan, gratitude shining softly in her eyes. You don't talk much, she said, but when you do, your words land true. The room fell quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet, filled with warmth rather than tension. After some time, Ethan stood to leave, not wanting to overstay. Mara walked him outside, the lantern glowing between them. The night was cool, and the hills loomed softly under the moonlight. Thank you for helping with the fence, she said, and for being kind. Ethan nodded. You're easy to be kind to. Mara stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she took a slow breath. There's something I should tell you. People around here expect me to leave soon. My family arranged something for me. A marriage. Ethan felt a small weight settle inside him. Do you want that? She shook her head slowly. Not if I don't choose it myself. Her honesty hung in the air like a fragile thread. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment, but his silence wasn't empty. It was thoughtful, full of things he couldn't yet put into words. Mara stepped back, lifting the lantern. Good night. Ethan Cole. Good night, Mara. He rode away, but halfway down the trail, he glanced back. Mara still stood there, lantern in hand, watching him disappear into the dark. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something new, something warm, unexpected, and quietly powerful, settling inside his heart. The storm arrived earlier than anyone expected. Ethan woke before sunrise to the sound of wind pushing hard against the wooden walls of his ranch house. The sky outside looked heavy, almost bruised, and the air carried that sharp, tense feeling that comes before strong weather. He stepped outside, tightening his coat, and watched the clouds rolling fast across the plains. He planned to secure his own livestock, then ride toward Mara's homestead to make sure her family was safe. While tying down loose boards and checking his fences, he kept thinking about her. The lantern glow on her face the night before. The softness in her eyes when she admitted she didn't want the arranged marriage. The way she worked beside him, as if they had been doing so for years. Every memory felt sharper today, maybe because the storm made the world feel more fragile. By the time he saddled his horse, the wind had picked up. Dust swirled across the road and branches fell from nearby trees. He urged his horse forward, leaning low in the saddle as the storm's breath pushed against him. The sky darkened further, and small drops of rain began to fall like scattered whispers. When he reached Mara's homestead, he saw her outside already. fighting against the wind as she tried to move a frightened goat into the shed. Her long braid whipped behind her, and her clothes pressed tightly to her tall frame as she struggled with the animal. Ethan jumped off his horse and ran toward her. "Need help?" he called out, raising his voice above the wind. Mara looked up, surprised but relieved. "Yes, this one's too scared to move." Together they guided the goat inside. Mara held the door steady against the wind while Ethan gathered the last few animals from the yard. Mara's mother worked in the doorway, tying sacks of grain to the beams so they wouldn't blow away. She thanked Ethan breathlessly when he helped her carry a basket inside. The first heavy drops of rain began pounding the roof as they finished. Thunder rumbled across the land, deep and long like a rolling drum. Ethan stood inside the doorway, wiping the water from his face. "You came early," Mara said, stepping closer. "I knew the storm would hit hard," he replied. "Wanted to make sure you all were safe." Mara's mother smiled warmly at him. "Bless you for thinking of us." She nudged her daughter gently, whispering something Ethan couldn't hear. Mara shot her mother a small look, but didn't speak, though a faint blush warmed her cheeks. Ethan noticed, but he pretended not to. A loud crack cut through the moment. A tree branch had fallen near the house, shaking the ground. Mara rushed outside to check the damage, and Ethan followed. The rain now came fast and forceful, turning the ground into mud. The fallen branch had crushed part of their side fence. Livestock huddled inside the remaining enclosure, trembling. Mara pointed at the fence. "If that breaks any further, the animals might escape." Ethan nodded and grabbed a spare board lying nearby. "Let's fix it before the wind makes it worse." They worked as quickly as the storm allowed. Mara held the damaged posts steady, her strong arms barely shaking despite the wind, while Ethan hammered new boards into place. Water ran down their faces, soaking their clothes, but they kept going. The storm roared around them, but their focus stayed firm. Ethan felt something powerful in those moments, working beside her, fighting against the storm, sharing the same struggle. It felt like the land was testing them together, seeing if they truly matched. And they did. Every move she made balanced his. Every decision he took balanced hers. They didn't need long words or explanations. Their teamwork felt natural, almost like it had been waiting for this moment. When the fence was finally secured, thunder cracked again, this time closer. Mara turned toward the hills and frowned. "Someone's out there," she said suddenly. Ethan followed her gaze. Through the sheets of rain, he saw movement. Several people rushing toward the homestead. They were travelers, likely caught by the storm while trying to cross the plains. Their clothes were drenched, and two of them struggled to carry a third person who appeared weak or injured. Mara didn't wait for instructions. She ran toward them, Ethan close behind. Together, they guided the travelers inside the house, where the warmth and lantern light welcomed them. Mara's mother hurried to bring blankets and hot water. One of the travelers, a young boy no older than 13, shook violently from cold. Mara wrapped him in a thick blanket and sat beside him to help him breathe calmly. Ethan checked the injured man, who had twisted his ankle trying to escape the rising flood near the riverbed. The storm outside grew louder and more violent, making the windows shudder. Rain hammered the roof like fists, and wind howled like a wild creature. Ethan moved from person to person, helping where he could. Mara worked beside him the entire time, her tall frame moving gracefully despite the small space. She comforted the frightened children, offered warm drinks, and checked on her mother. She was strong yet gentle in every action. Ethan watched her quietly as she worked. There was something in the way she cared for others, something that showed a deeper softness beneath all the strength. It made him admire her even more. After some time, when the travelers finally settled and the house grew calmer, Ethan stepped outside to check the storm again. Mara followed him. They stood under the small awning, watching lightning flash across the sky. "It's worse than expected," Mara said, her voice steady but thoughtful. "Storms like this pass," Ethan replied softly. "Everything passes." Mara glanced at him. "You stay calm even when the world is loud." "You do too," he said. She smiled faintly. "Not always. You handle things better than most." Mara looked out at the storm again, her expression distant. "People think because I'm tall and strong I feel no fear, but I do. I fear things I can't control. I fear choices made for me. I fear living a life that doesn't fit who I am." Her voice was low, carried away slightly by the wind. Ethan turned toward her slowly. "You deserve a choice," he said gently. "Everyone does." Mara looked down at her hands, rain dripping from her fingers. "Sometimes I think the world expects me to be something I'm not." Ethan shook his head. "The world doesn't decide that. You do." She looked at him then, truly looked, and her eyes softened in a way he hadn't seen before. Something quiet and deep passed between them, something neither could describe but both could feel. Before Ethan could say anything more, a loud cry came from inside the house. One of the travelers was calling for help. Mara rushed back in and Ethan followed. The injured man had tried to stand but collapsed again from pain. Mara helped him sit back down gently, and Ethan wrapped his ankle more securely. As the night grew darker and the storm hammered on, Mara and Ethan worked side by side, watching over every frightened traveler. Hours passed slowly, but they remained strong, offering comfort and calm to everyone inside the small house. At one point, while checking the windows, Mara stood close enough that Ethan could feel her steady breath. She looked at him and whispered, "I'm glad you came today." Ethan answered softly, "I'm glad you're safe." Their words hung between them, warm despite the cold storm outside. When dawn finally approached, the storm began to weaken. The wind slowed, the rain softened, and the first faint light appeared on the horizon. Exhausted but standing strong, Mara and Ethan watched the sky lighten together. The land looked renewed, washed clean by the storm. And something between them felt renewed as well, something quiet, growing and steady, like the slow coming of morning after a long night. Ethan didn't know what would happen next. Mara didn't either. But both felt the same truth deep inside. This storm had changed something. It brought them closer, tied their paths in a way neither could untie now. The world had shown them how well they worked together, and neither could ignore that anymore. When the storm finally ended, the land looked different. Trees leaned in new directions, the ground was heavy with water, and the air smelled fresh, almost like the world had taken a deep breath. Inside Mara's homestead, everyone was tired but safe. The travelers thanked Mara's family, shaking Ethan's hand again and again, telling him they would remember his calmness when everything felt scary. Mara helped them gather their belongings, and soon they left for the trading post, promising to return and repay the kindness one day. Once they were gone, the house became quiet again. Mara stood by the doorway, watching the weak sunlight settle across the hills. Her braid hung loosely, her clothes still damp in some places, but she looked peaceful. Ethan stood beside her, wiping mud from his boots. "You were strong last night," he said gently. "So were you," she replied. They shared a small moment of silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt warm, like both of them finally understood something they had been trying to see clearly for days. Mara's mother watched them from the table with soft eyes, sensing something growing between them. By noon, the sky was clear, though clouds still floated in slow layers overhead. Ethan stepped outside to tighten his saddle. He planned to return to his ranch and check on the damage the storm had caused. Mara followed him to the fence. "Will you come back?" she asked. He looked at her, catching the quiet worry in her voice. "If you want me to." She nodded, her eyes lowering. "I do." Before Ethan could say anything more, they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the north. Mara stiffened. Ethan turned toward the sound. A small group of riders came down the trail, raising dust as they approached. The lead rider was a well-dressed man with a dark coat and polished boots, too polished for frontier work. His horse was sleek and tired from fast travel. Mara's mother stepped outside immediately, placing a hand over her heart. Mara stayed still, her face unreadable, though Ethan sensed something tightening inside her. The lead rider stopped in front of the house. He dismounted with a confident, practiced movement and dusted off his coat. "Good afternoon," he said in a clipped voice. "I'm here for Mara." Ethan felt his jaw tighten slightly. Mara didn't move. "Why?" The man smiled stiffly. "You know why. Your family arranged our marriage. I've come to take you to my ranch. My name is Randall Ashford." Mara's mother stepped forward in a hurry, her voice nervous. "The storm delayed everything. We thought we had more time." Randall raised a hand, silencing her politely. "No trouble. I understand, but the weather cleared, and I see no reason to wait. It's best if she comes with me today. We have a long road to ride." Mara stood frozen. Ethan watched her carefully. There was something in her eyes, something like fear mixed with quiet resistance. Randall turned to Mara with a stiff smile. "Are you ready?" She didn't answer. Randall frowned. "You knew this day would come," he said, a bit sharper now. "You are promised to me. Your height, strength, none of that matters to me. You'll be useful on the ranch, and I'll treat you well." Ethan felt the words cut through the air like cold wind. Useful. Not loved, not wanted for who she was, just useful. Mara lowered her eyes, her hands curling slightly at her sides. Ethan could see it. She didn't want this. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to belong to someone who spoke of her as if she were part of the land instead of a person with her own heart. Randall stepped closer, reaching for her arm. "Come, we must go." Before his hand could touch her, Ethan spoke. Not loudly, not angrily, but with a steady calm that felt stronger than any shout. "Let her choose." Randall turned slowly, surprised. "Who are you?" "A friend," Ethan said. Randall gave a small laugh. "This has nothing to do with you. She is promised. The agreement was made." Ethan didn't step forward. He didn't need to. His voice stayed steady. A promise means nothing if the one promised doesn't want it. Mara's mother looked at Ethan with wide, uncertain eyes. Mara slowly lifted her head, her gaze fixed on him, as if trying to understand how one man could stay so calm while another spoke with so much power. Randall scoffed. "That's not how things work out here, cowboy." "It's exactly how they should work," Ethan replied softly. The wind passed through the yard, carrying the quiet tension. Randall's jaw tightened. "This is a family arrangement. You have no right to interfere." "I'm not interfering," Ethan said. "I'm asking for her voice to matter." Mara stared at him, something breaking open inside her, something she had held tight for years. Randall stepped back, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous. Mara, come with me. Your family knows this is the best path for you." For a moment, it seemed like Mara might fold under the pressure, her shoulders stiff and uncertain. But then she looked at Ethan again. His calm eyes, his steady breath, the quiet strength that had never once tried to control her. Memories from the storm, from the fence, from the rattlesnake moment, all of them returned at once. She took a long breath, and her tall frame straightened, gaining height not just from her body, but from her spirit. Then she spoke in a clear voice. "No?" Randall blinked, stunned. "What did you say?" "I said no," Mara repeated, louder now. "I will not go with you. I do not want a life that someone else decided for me." Her mother covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Randall's face turned stiff. Your family agreed. They agreed out of fear, Mara said, her voice steady. Fear that no one would want me. Fear that I am too tall, too strong, too different. But I don't want a life where I feel small inside. Ethan felt warmth spread through his chest. Randall tried again, desperation coloring his words. Think carefully, Mara. You won't get another offer like mine. Mara shook her head slowly. I don't want an offer. I want a choice, and I choose my own path. Randall stared at her, then at Ethan, then at the family. Finally, with a frustrated exhale, he stepped back. Very well. If that's your choice, I won't force it. He mounted his horse sharply. Good day. He rode away without another word. The yard fell silent, except for the soft breeze brushing against the wet ground. Mara stood motionless, overwhelmed by the weight of what she had just done. Her mother approached her slowly, placing a trembling hand on her arm. You spoke your heart, she whispered. I'm proud of you. Mara's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Instead, she turned to Ethan. He didn't speak at first. He simply stepped closer, quietly, respectfully, with the same calm that had surprised both her and the rattlesnake days ago. Mara took a slow breath. You didn't try to decide for me. You just stood there, steady. That's all anyone deserves, Ethan said. She looked at him fully then, seeing not just a cowboy, but someone who saw her, someone who never flinched at her height, her strength, or her loud voice, someone who understood calm as a kind of courage. Mara whispered the same words she had spoken the first moment they met, but now with a soft, teasing smile instead of a roar. Cowboy, why are you always so calm? Do I not frighten you? Ethan smiled gently. You never frighten me. Their eyes met, warm and honest. The air between them felt like something new, something safe, solid, and full of quiet promise. Ethan slowly reached out and offered his hand. Mara looked at it for a moment, then placed her much larger hand in his, the size difference gentle rather than strange. They fit together in their own way. Together they walked toward the house, the sunlight growing brighter behind them. The world felt open again, wide and full of paths they could choose themselves. And from that day forward, Mara and Ethan began building a life not based on fear or arrangements, but on respect, calmness, and the steady warmth they found in each other. Just like the moment a rattlesnake once lay quietly beneath his boot, teaching them both that peace sometimes appears in the strangest ways.